Hello there everyone, welcome to the third NaNoWriMo vlog for 2022. If you've been following along my NaNoWriMo journey thus far this year, you may know that it's been a journey. Ups, downs, crises, epiphanies. My book was a mess, absolute disaster. I was having a crisis about it. In retrospect, maybe I was being a bit over dramatic, but also to be fair, it had been causing me problems for months. And then it kind of started to work, and I attribute that to just consistently working on it. I kind of realized some little things that had to change, and then it started going super well, and it's still going really well, honestly. I've been really happy with the work that I've been doing. Since 2020, I've done NaNoWriMo, and I've been doing kind of just like, well, I call it NaNoTrymo. It's NaNoWriMo for people who are too tired to do anything but just try their best, which is basically just writing every day, and I don't have any word counts. So last year I didn't have a project, so I just wrote every day and jumped around between projects. The year before I worked on Holding a Ghost. When I was doing NaNoWriMo in 2020 for Holding a Ghost, one thing that I really found good about it and really liked about it, I didn't need any motivation to write because I just knew I was gonna write that day. I never had those days where I'm like, I'm gonna write today, and then by the end of the day I'm like, I'm too tired now, and then don't, which I sometimes do. I don't know why I do that, because writing is a great source of serotonin for my brain and something that brings me a lot of happiness and joy and fulfillment. So why do I put it off? When I do like a write every day challenge, I don't experience that, and it feels like it takes no effort or motivation to write. Yesterday I was working on a scene that I don't want to get too long. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to take it, but I went back and read the previous scene with this character, and I feel like I have a good idea of what I want the scene to accomplish. In a video where I talked about problems I was having with this book, I talked about this relationship. It's between my protagonist and this other character called Raymond. The rest of the relationships kind of all revolve around a family. Raymond is outside the family. Was one of the first relationships I planned for the book, and is actually where the title comes from, but is also the relationship that I currently feel like doesn't fit as naturally into the story. And I talked about in a previous video where I was talking about all the problems I was having with this book, how I was at a crossroads where I wasn't sure if I just scrap this whole storyline, because at the moment I don't really know how it fits into the story. I think that sometimes you need to plant a seed and not know exactly what kind of tree you're planting, and I know that there is a potential chance that I will have to cut this whole storyline later. And I think I have faith in myself, like in my ability to give this storyline meaning and purpose and tie it into the book. So I'm really trying to be very like observant as I write it, like look for the potential there, because I know there's potential but I don't really know exactly what it is. After that, I'm gonna go back to the main relationship of the book between the two main characters, Rowan, who's the protagonist, and Suze, who's their brother's wife. That's the main relationship where there's the most tension, and I love writing that relationship. I've been so happy with all their scenes and all their conversations. I find that every time I sit down to write that dynamic, the scene turns out so well. I don't usually know where the scenes are going, so I'm figuring them out as I write. It's really thrilling to like see them evolve, because I feel like this dynamic just has a lot of tension and in a lot of different ways, and so I can just kind of like put these characters in a situation and let them talk, and like it's always very juicy. No drama at the moment, no crisis. It's all good. I'm thriving. What can I say about how well this is going, other than to say that it's going so well? Like, it's really going so well. I was just hosting some writing sprints for work, so I managed to get some writing in. I'm feeling so good about my book right now. This is gonna sound really cheesy. I feel like I'm kind of at this point where I'm kind of like falling in love with this book, and I'm starting to feel the same way that I felt near the start of Honey Vinegar. I'm really starting to feel this like really profound excitement for the story, and I'm starting to feel a lot for the characters, which was something that I was struggling with before. I felt like earlier I was interested by these characters, but I didn't really feel anything for them, and I feel like I'm starting to really feel for these characters in like a deep emotional way. For a long time I was seeing this as basically just Honey Vinegar but worse. Saltbirds does feel like in some ways a follow-up to Honey Vinegar, in the sense that stylistically it's more similar. I didn't really know what about this book was special and what about this book I cared about. I don't think I'd really identified that. I think I just had concepts that I was interested in, but I hadn't really identified like why this book was something that was gonna mean something to me. But I feel like I'm really starting to find that, genuinely feel like this is a story worth writing. And I think for a long time I was questioning why I was writing this, and I think I'm starting to find those things. Maybe they were more subtle in this book than I was expecting and they took longer to emerge, but I'm just really feeling this like a huge amount of appreciation and excitement for my book. And I'm experiencing what I also experienced near the beginning of Honey Vinegar, which is where every time I sit down to write, I feel like the story grows exponentially beyond that. This was something that happened to me near the start of Honey Vinegar. You know, that book is a book that I started writing without any prior planning. Like, I got the idea and I started writing it because I had to, and I'd never done that before. I was coming out of a multi-year stretch where I had been outlining my work. I was writing it on a school deadline, and so I didn't really have a choice. The most exciting part about that draft, the beginning of that draft at least, is that it felt like every time I sat down to write, yes, I would write that scene, but I would also have like multiple realizations about the story. Events later in the book would start to click into place, and it felt like every single scene that I wrote was a window to just like so much more depth and development in the book. And that hadn't been happening with this draft. I felt like every scene was just itself. That started happening now, where every time I sit down to write a scene, I feel like it really unlocks aspects of the story that before were hidden from me. Every scene kind of feels like it's starting to clarify the whole arcs of the book. Writing this book has become that fulfilling, exciting thing that I was hoping for. Every scene that I write goes in very unexpected directions. For a little bit, I was starting to kind of even doubt my writing process. For several books, this is being the third one, I've been a committed, discovery writer, and really felt like that had been really working for me, and I'd noticed such an improvement in the depth of my writing. I've started to feel like, maybe it's not working with this book, but I couldn't imagine how I would outline it. Now I'm really starting to feel like the true joy of my discovery writing process, which is sitting down to write a scene and it going a completely different direction than I was planning, but that direction being so much more exciting, that direction then leading me down a road that is so much more compelling. And if I plan my work, the scenes don't have room to do that. They don't have room to develop in those unexpected ways because I'm constantly trying to rein them in to fit in with what I've planned to happen later. But since my plan for what happens later is very open, I do have beats I want to hit, but I don't exactly know when or how exactly we're gonna get there. I feel like I have so much freedom every time I sit down to write to just see where the scene goes and see what emerges, and I feel like I've learned such compelling things about my characters, and that's really what's making this book so exciting to write and so thrilling to write. It's honestly just like such a relief. If you saw me at the beginning of the month, I was such a mess. I've been fighting with this book for months. It was so frustrating, and I was starting to worry that this would never click and I would never get this sense of effortlessness is what it is. When I sit down, the words just happen and they're good. Yesterday I sat down again with no real idea where I was going. I wanted to put a flashback there because I wanted to explore Rowan's upbringing and their relationship with their parents, because I have really started to realize that relationship is so much more important than I've been giving it time for. Like, it's not on the page as much as it should be, and I really didn't even have an entry point. I just knew I wanted it to be about their parents, and I was like, man, how am I supposed to just cook up like a deeply formative event? I literally started with what I knew about these characters, which is their jobs, turned into like some of the best writing that I've done in a really long time on a language level. Prose is such a like exciting part of writing to me. I get really excited about prose, and for me the most exciting thing about prose isn't just the prose in and of itself, but it's prose in conjunction with character and like using the language to really create like a character psychology. And I felt like the prose had just been kind of dull, but the prose was really more reminiscent of in the first chapter, where I felt like, again, there was a lot of specificity. It wasn't like fanciful description, but the details were so specifically chosen, and I felt like I'd really lost that, but I got into some really great specific detail, and it just turned into a scene that I love writing. I wrote a bit of it, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna call it a night and just like watch Warrior done. I've written enough. No, I want to go back to it. I want to write more. I don't feel done with this scene. Earlier in the month when I was really struggling, writing 400 words would feel painful. It was like pulling teeth. Now, the story and the words and the characters really feel like they're developing their own life. And so it just feels so effortless to write, and I can just sit down and the story just, Effie, what are you doing? And the story just appears, and it's just a relief. I know that this won't last forever. I'm sure at a certain point I will hit a block and get stuck, but I feel like I have forged that connection with the project, which is what will sustain me till the end. And I feel like now that I've really started to uncover the things that I genuinely love about this project and that I think will make it in the end a story worth telling, I feel like that was the key, and I found those things and I'm invested in those things. That's just fueling my writing in a way where the writing itself feels so fun and effortless. And I've been thinking about edits that I want to make because throughout the second part of the book, and I'm on part 3, I'm gonna wrap up part 3 with this chapter. Part 1 is pretty okay. The end of it is shaky, but like structurally I think it's there. And a lot of the writing is good. Part 2 is a mess. There's really not much that's very good. That's where I was really struggling. And then part 3 is where I really kind of pulled it back on track because I know I really need to heavily revise part 2. Nothing about it really excites me. And I'd been like trying to think, you know, what changes do I make? Because I feel like structurally it is what it needs to be. But I think I've realized, you know, what I need to do when I revise that isn't dramatically change the structure or cut it all. It's imbue it with this same sense of richness that I have in the story now. Dive deeper into the context, dive deeper into the emotions, dive deeper into the tensions, really unpack, you know, those feelings and backstory. I feel like that's what's really giving this book life, is that I'm like fully unpacking the scenes now. In a video that I have, I think it's like my most viewed video actually, where I talk about like my best writing tips. One of them that I remember reading in a Glimmer Train bulletin years ago that's always stuck with me is, if your story is boring, slow it down, don't speed it up. Unpack it more, imbue it with richness, imbue it with description and emotion and life. And I think that's what I need to do throughout part 2, is keep those same beats, but just go make them more tense, more exciting, more dramatic, you know? I think this is a pretty juicy plot line actually when you think about it. There's a lot of really juicy character drama and tension. Let's see that, let's like feel that more, because I feel like now I'm at the point where I'm really feeling that and I'm feeling the urgency. That's I think what part 2 needs, is not like a big restructure, but is to be given life to that structure, you know? Anyway, someone is sawing something outside, and I'm just distracted because Effie is in her little cat box. Let me show you. You in your box, Muffy? You never go in there. For some reason. You always sit on your little perch. But you're in your box today. What would you like to say to the people? Would you like to say, I am your all-powerful and evil overlord? Yeah, I knew it. You aspire to be a tyrant, Muffy? She says, I am a tyrant already. Yes, I know, because I live under your rule. And you are not a benevolent god, I can tell you that. But you're cute, so it's fine. All sins forgiven when you've got that little face. So I'm kind of getting to the point in this whole process where I don't really have that much to say, because it's just going well. I don't know, what can I tell you? How much have I written for NaNoWriMo? 18,000 words? Going into the month, I was expecting to maybe write about 15K. That wasn't a goal, that was just like what I was estimating. Going well, I don't really know what to say. I'm just happy about it. I wanted to do a little music and book spotlight and talk about the things I'm listening to and the books I'm reading to inspire me. I always like to try and find some comp titles to read because I find that just really helps inspire me. It just kind of furthers that sense of immersion to just like be surrounding myself with media that reminds me of my books. Finding comps for this book has been more difficult, I would say, than other books I've written. The ones I've noted so far: Demigods by Eliza Robertson, With Teeth by Kristen Arnett, and what I'm currently reading, Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, which is kind of just vibes. It's not super conceptual. I think this book maybe isn't as high concept. It's been a little harder to identify comps. So I've kind of been looking for books that have teenage narrators but aren't YA, so my book is adult. Messy teenage narrators with like kind of strange family situations. Ideally, if it's queer. Some of the books, I haven't read any of these. The first one is Avalon by Nell Zink. This is about a girl whose mother joins a Buddhist colony. In my book, the main character's parents join a cult in the beginning. That's kind of the inciting incident. Then I also picked up The World Cannot Give by Tara Isabel Burton. This is set at like a girls' boarding school and there's like culty vibes. Kind of looks like everything that I want. It says a coming-of-age novel about queer desire, religious zealotry, and the hunger for transcendence. That's kind of like everything that I like in a book. Mary Lou is Everywhere by Sarah Elaine Smith. This is kind of like more YA, maybe like on the border. I'm not really sure. But the reason I picked this one up is because it has kind of the same concept as a short story that I wrote recently. In the summer, I wrote a story called You Know Where Your Body Is Buried, which is about a woman impersonating a missing girl to the missing girl's family. When I was writing it, I remember talking to a friend and I was like, this seems like such a good concept that I just can't believe that someone else hasn't done it before. Like, this must have been done and I just haven't seen it. Well, similar vibe to Saltbirds as well. And then finally I picked up Bad Fruit by Ella King. I don't actually remember exactly what it's about, but I think it's just about like messy family dynamics, and that is my book. So definitely has been a little tricky to find like really close comps. Again, it's not a super high concept book, but if you can think of adult books that are about teenage protagonists, like the girls kind of vibe. They're about weird family dynamics. Bonus points if there's culty vibes. Extra bonus points, and by that I mean like it's a necessity if there are queer storylines. That is really what I want. I just need books about messy queer teenage narrators and their messy weird family dynamics. So I also wanted to do a little music highlight. I have a playlist for every book I write. I will link my Spotify if you want to see the playlist for this book. I also have one for Holding a Ghost and one for Honey Vinegar, but I wanted to just like specifically highlight some stuff that I've been listening to that's been really inspiring. So the first album, this has been my favorite album recently, and it's Honey Bones by Dope Lemon, who I just learned is Angus from Angus and Julia Stone. This is his solo project, and I just learned yesterday that this is Angus from Angus and Julia Stone, and now I can't unhear it because he has a pretty distinctive voice. This album, like, this is a no skip. It's so good. Some of my favorite songs, Uptown Folks, so good. Maybe I can't even pick my favorite song from the album, honestly. Coyote is so good. Stonecutters, Chef's Kiss. Honey Bones is so good. I listened to that on repeat all day yesterday. The Way You Do, so good. The first song, Marinade, the album that I think initially, like when I first started working on this book, I didn't really know what music to pair with it. But then this album, I realized, I'm like, this is If My Protagonist Was an Album, and it's How to Be a Human Being by Glass Animals. Poplar Street, probably my favorite song from that album. If My Protagonist Was an Album, they'd be this album. If they were a song, they'd be Poplar Street. Take a Slice is also very My Protagonist kind of vibes. That album and Honey Bones are like, if I had to pick two albums that could just be like the soundtrack to this book, those two albums. Of course, there's some Nothing But Thieves from one of their newer EPs, their song Miracle Baby. That one makes a frequent appearance in my writing sessions. I listen to that one a lot. Last Orders, also really great. I don't know if those are necessarily my two favorite songs by Nothing But Thieves. I mean, they have so many songs that are so good, but they're the ones that I associate the most with this project. I've also been listening a lot to this one song, Noche Oscura by FAQS, super good, very chill vibes. And then another one that I've been listening to a lot for this book that I've just really developed associations with is Dog Boy by Swansea Skag. Only song that I know by them, but really good. Music is such an important part of my writing process. I listen to music when I write, I listen to music when I'm brainstorming. Every day I try to go for a walk and listen to music that relates to whatever it is I'm working on, and I get a lot of ideas. So really, really important part of my writing process. It's really interesting to actually highlight when we're banned to see the music that I initially added. I had a lot of music from Leela. They have an album called Songs from a Room, and then this other song called Science of Fish. And it's very quiet. It's like quiet, eerie, very minimalist, like just like eerie vocals with like minimalist kind of eerie piano. Initially I had a much like quieter, tenser kind of eerie vibe, whereas now I think the vibe of the book is a lot more like chaotic. If you have books in this kind of camp, please recommend them to me. So I'm just wrapping up my writing for the day. I wrote like 1,100 words. I am writing what I was planning to be basically the last beat in this scene, and I thought it was going to be a super short beat. It probably wasn't even going to be in any dialogue. I just needed my main character to go do one thing. However, with the way the scene has evolved, now it's turning into a bit of a longer sequence because I just realized a way that it could go that I think is a lot higher on drama and will create quite a like intriguing, dramatic situation. There ended up being some dialogue that my main character was overhearing. Some of it, I'm not sure if it's, the thing is I really like it, but there's a few things in there and I'm like, the characters say this, that's gonna have like really huge repercussions on the story. Do I want to go down that road? The chapter is becoming quite long. I just checked, it's like over 6,000 words, which normally I think my chapters are more around like 3,000 to 4,000, so this is becoming quite a long chapter. The thing is, I wanted to end the part after this chapter because I think that I will have really said what I needed this arc of the book to do, and I'm ready to move into the next arc of the story, where I have some other things that I want to start kind of developing. I don't want to cut this into another chapter because I feel like it's just like a very weird way to end the whole part. Like, I don't want to end a chapter kind of midway through a sequence of events. It's becoming kind of a longer sequence because my main character is trapped somewhere. I'm just gonna write it out. It'll be as long as it is, and maybe there can be some reshuffling later if I feel like the chapter really is too long, just because I don't know, having like a 7,000 word chapter seems like just like the pacing would be a bit off. Granted that would be like almost double the length of the other chapters in the book. It's gone from being a very simple scene, and a scene that I did need to happen, like I really needed that beat. It's gone from being a very simple beat to being a very complex beat that is accomplishing a lot of things and touching on a lot of different plot lines in the book and a lot of different threads. And I do like that it's starting to like tangle the threads. Like I think I talked about in the video where I was talking about how this book was going really badly. One thing that I felt was a problem was that there wasn't really much magnetism between threads. The different threads weren't really interacting. This is really bringing together like a lot of threads. It's interesting because I'd planned it to be such a simple beat, but as I was just writing it, I just noticed a few opportunities to create like a more developed sequence that would be a lot more tense. But it's also naturally ending up quite long, so I don't really know how I'm gonna structure that in terms of the chapters and stuff. I'll just move this whole sequence to the next chapter and make it like the second half of the next chapter. I think that would actually work. Well, I'm glad I talked myself through that little problem. I don't know, I don't feel burned out, but I do feel like I could maybe use a break. When I did Nano in 2020, by week 4, I was really exhausted and really felt like I needed a break. But anyways, it is going well. I'm not really feeling burned out or anything. So I've been mulling over the structure of this chapter, and I think I've figured out what I'm gonna do. I think I have a pretty good solution. So I think I'm going to do what I talked about yesterday and move the second half of this chapter to be the second half of the next chapter. So I'm currently writing chapter 10, and I'm gonna take this sequence that's at the end of chapter 10 and make it the end of chapter 11 instead. And I think that this will work for a lot of reasons. I don't think that this sequence has to be a direct follow-up to what happens in the first part of chapter 10. It actually kind of follows up on some stuff that happened a bit earlier, and I actually think that given the way that the scene has evolved, I think it would be good to actually have some breathing room between what happens earlier in chapter 10 and actually even what happened in chapter 9 and this event. So I'm gonna move it to the end of chapter 11. That way I don't end up with like a 7,000 word chapter, because I feel like that will just be very odd for my pacing. But this sequence really doesn't stand on its own as a chapter either, so I think it has to be part of a longer chapter. So I'm gonna make it the second half of chapter 11. I think it'll fit really well there. The thing is, I don't want to end chapter 10 with the ending that would leave me, because it just kind of ends on dialogue and it just feels like not a neat arc to that chapter. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add one little thing there to be the end. The chapter begins with an email. So throughout this book, there are emails that the main character is writing to their best friend Meredith, who isn't present in the setting. We see her in the first few chapters, and then the setting moves and she's not there. I really wanted that ability for them to have like long, drawn out, almost monologues to each other. I really actually like the way that like distance has changed the way that Rowan feels about Meredith, and I feel like the emails that Rowan writes to Meredith, some of which they don't even send, they just write and don't send, I feel like are a lot of the most vulnerable parts of the book, and where we really see into like their psyche in like a really kind of tender way. And I feel like something about Rowan like having to like tangibly write that out, it's just a dimension I really like. So I've kind of been having these emails, not in every chapter, but in the moments where I feel like emotionally Rowan would reach out to Meredith based on what's happening in their like present location and storyline. The chapter had begun with one of those emails, so I think I'm just going to end it with Meredith's response. I think Rowan is emotionally deeply affected by Meredith more than any other character, can kind of use that note to close off this part. I feel like it needs to end on like the correct emotional note to bring us into the beginning of another chapter and even another part. So I'm feeling good about that. I think that that's like the right way to structure this section of the book. So the month is almost over. I would say I'm, with 2 days of writing left, today and tomorrow, just reaching the point where I feel like I'm ready for a break. I really didn't write much yesterday. I just wrote 200 words, which is fine because my goal for the month was just to write every day, so it really doesn't matter. But I am starting to get to the point where I'm like, I could use a few days off. You know, I work really well when I work on multiple projects and I can bounce between different things. And I'm starting to feel like I really would benefit from a few days off from writing and then working on something else for a little bit. To be honest, I'm having kind of a bad day, so maybe that's why. So I'll probably just write a little bit and not really worry about it that much. I've accomplished what I wanted from this challenge, which was to get my book back on track and to feel good about it. I exceeded expectations with that one. My feelings on the book haven't changed, and this kind of high that I'm feeling with how well the story is turning out, and it's not turning out like how I wanted it in my brain, it's turning out better. I'm just feeling like I need a couple days off, to be honest. So in the first part of this series, I did a segment where I walked through how I discovery wrote a scene and what it looks like for me as a discovery writer to figure out a scene as I'm writing it, and to like unravel a scene basically. And so I wanted to do that same thing but with a full chapter. I just finished chapter 10 and it definitely really evolved and changed a lot as I wrote it. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and I wanted to just kind of walk through this chapter and the scenes in it and the kind of shuffling that I did as I wrote. Get a lot of questions about how my discovery writing process works. Going into this chapter, there was one thread that I really wanted to follow up on, a character relationship with this character named Raymond, who is really the one character who's kind of outside the family. He's a man who lives on the island. I wanted to make sure that I was having Rowan go into this relationship as a result of the emotional state that they're in. But it didn't feel like I could just immediately jump into that, so I decided to begin with a email. So throughout this book, the main character Rowan is emailing with their best friend Meredith. I decided to have them email because I wanted to keep Meredith in the story because that relationship is such an important force of tension. It's a really important motivator for my main character, I think. I didn't want to have them like just messaging because I felt like I really wanted the opportunity for them to kind of send each other very long monologues, because I feel like the longer they talk, especially with my protagonist in these emails, the more we start to see like their true intentions emerging. So I just justified that because the kids don't email by saying that the service is really bad, so they can't really instant message. They just have to like write emails and send them in like rare moments they have service, or the main character has service. So I started with an email from Meredith, or an email to Meredith, that I really wanted to use to follow up on how, like, kind of show how Rowan is feeling about some things that have happened and kind of translate into that relationship. So that's how I began. After that, I decided to then go into this scene where Rowan would go visit Raymond. He does taxidermy. In their previous interaction, he had said when Rowan was leaving, like, you can visit any time, make sure to bring something dead with you, basically. So they basically find a roadkill, a squirrel, and they decide to bring it to him. They go out, they find this roadkill, and then the next scene they go to Raymond. But then I kind of, as I got deeper into the scene, I had this realization that I could actually have this interaction be tied in even more with the present stakes in the house, basically having Cody tell them that they have to leave. So in the previous chapter, there had been a big argument and a lot of stuff was revealed and there was a lot of tension. And so I added a little scene where Rowan's older brother, Cody, who they have a very antagonistic relationship, basically says, like, don't get involved in me and my wife's business, stop expecting her to babysit you. They've kind of just been fully rejected from the family. So then they go to Raymond's and it's more causally connected to like the present storyline. I wasn't really sure where this conversation with Raymond would go. I wanted Rowan to talk about their parents. Rowan has never really had good relationships with authority figures or parental figures, and so I think this is kind of like their first chance to have a positive relationship, maybe with a pseudo parental figure. I ended up having Rowan, you know, start telling them about their parents and actually kind of have a bit of a breakdown, which I wasn't really expecting because Rowan's pretty guarded and intentional about what they reveal to people. You know, they go to Raymond because they want some validation and end up kind of like getting to a very emotional place, which I wasn't really expecting, but I think it was good because I think it's good to see that in my character. Like, I'm very careful about having my characters cry, to be honest. But I think it ended up kind of mirroring this scene from the previous chapter with Suze, where in the previous scene, the two of them are talking, and Suze tells Rowan her backstory and kind of tells it for a reason, and then ends up getting really emotional while speaking about it, kind of maybe more than she was wanting. So kind of mirrored that and had kind of the same thing happen. So then as I was writing that scene, I was like, oh, this would actually be the perfect place to include a flashback about Rowan's parents. So this was perfect, and so I added in a flashback, which I was really happy with how that turned out. So after that, I had Rowan go back to the house, and I wanted to follow up on Suze and Rowan's dynamic and kind of see how that's all been changed given everything that happened. And so I had a conversation between the two of them. Then after that, I wanted to have this one beat. So Cody, Rowan's brother, has something of theirs. They took something of theirs at the beginning and I needed Rowan to go steal that thing back. So I was going to have Rowan kind of like excuse themselves while the whole family is busy with something, like playing a game or something, or having dinner, and then go try and find it in Cody's room. And that was supposed to be a fairly brief thing. I was just gonna have them snoop around a bit, have them be a bit nosy, and then find the thing and leave. But then I was like, actually, I could really draw this out into like a much more dramatic, compelling, dramatic beat by having the two of them come upstairs and have Rowan have to like hide in the closet and overhear a conversation about them. That would actually be like really interesting. That's like an event that's gonna need to have, that'll have further repercussions. And so this ended up up becoming a much longer beat, and that's when I got to the point where I realized that this whole sequence of events with Rowan hiding and overhearing this conversation would have to be a much longer segment, and so I decided to move that to the next chapter. And so then I was like, okay, I don't really want to end this chapter just on that conversation between Susan and Rowan, just because the way it ends doesn't feel like it neatly caps off the chapter. So I thought that I would go back to the emails from the beginning and have it end with Meredith's response. And I felt like that gave the chapter a really nice clean arc. In the end, really did I felt like it tied all the emotions in the chapter together, where everything felt like it was like part of a singular arc that had like a beginning, middle, and end. And I think that the sequence with Rowan stealing that thing and overhearing the conversation will fit in better in a later chapter. In the end, I was really happy with it. I think there were some really cohesive themes that were developed through the chapter. Yeah, that's kind of how my chapter evolved. When I wasn't really sure going into it, all I really wanted to have was to have Rowan and Raymond have a conversation and have Rowan steal something, and the rest kind of just, as I was going, I kind of just reshuffled and added and moved things as need be based on how the chapter was evolving. And that's usually how I write a chapter. It's usually kind of like that. I usually go in with an idea of what I want to happen or a starting point, and then I kind of just follow that where that leads. And there's definitely a lot of like moving as I get to the point where the like structure of the whole chapter fits together. And usually in a chapter there will be like a little thematic arc that will emerge, or kind of like an emotional arc, and one of those things will kind of signal like the wholeness of the chapter. And once I've explored that thing and capped that thing off, then it's time to go to the next one. Well, another Nano has come and gone. I don't have much to say today, to be honest. I think it's finally caught up to me that I am tired. I'm feeling like it is time for a bit of a break. Not feeling exhausted or burned out, but I've definitely gotten to the point where it's like, okay, the writing is not flowing the way it was before, and very much feels like it's just due to my own tiredness. I do typically find that if I work on the same thing or work on writing every day, it's usually about 3 weeks that I can maintain that before needing a break. So the fact that I went a month is pretty impressive. Yesterday I wrote very little, like 200 words. Probably gonna do the same today. I feel good about the book. I think it is a very natural point to maybe come back and start doing some edits. I've been mulling over how I'm going to approach editing this book, partly because the draft was going so well that I was like, I don't want to just stop drafting and kill this momentum. Part 2 needs a lot of work, and I just feel like for me it's an important part of my writing process to be reading over and editing my work as I draft it, and just really stay in tune with it and really, you know, shuffle things where needed, cut things as needed. Probably my current plan, don't hold me to this, to take a couple days off writing, then start doing that character development work that I said I was gonna do a while ago, and I just never ended up doing because the draft was going so well that, you know, when I would rather dedicate the time for writing in a day to the draft. But now I feel like I'm at the point where it would be good to take a break, so do some of that character development work. You know, it's gonna be December. I'm gonna go home to spend the holidays with my family. I'm probably just gonna put the draft aside and come back to it in the new year. There's literally no rush, right? Like, I have the luxury of being able to take my time, and why rush it if I don't have to? Take some time off, come back with some renewed energy. NaNoWriMo honestly exceeded expectations. Going in, it was so rough. I was struggling so much. I had one goal, well, I guess I had 2 goals: to write every day and to get this book working, and I accomplished both of those things. And the second one honestly exceeded my expectations. I got it working, and got it working far beyond what I was even expected. So I'm very pleased with the work that I did. I genuinely do not care about the word count. I just checked. I think I've written like 21,000 words, which is honestly more than I would have thought. I literally could not care less about the word count. It is so meaningless to me. For me, the 20,000 words is more indicative of the fact that I got this book working to the point that I was able to just kind of write a ton almost effortlessly. And that's really exciting. So I would count this NaNoWriMo as a huge win. Yeah, I don't know. I just consider this a big win, and I think it was a big lesson in like perseverance and not giving up, committing to a project. Something that I think I knew was true, that sometimes you have to just commit to it until it clicks. But this experience, I think, really solidified how important that is. If you have the will to like commit to it and persevere, the rest, the quality, the excitement will follow. It's easy to feel like it has to go the other way. Like, I need to have the quality in order to persevere, but sometimes that's not gonna happen. Sometimes you need the perseverance in order to get the quality, or sometimes it feels like the excitement, you need the excitement to, you know, have the consistency, but sometimes, again, it needs to be the other way. Sometimes you need the consistency to get to actually enjoying the project. And so I kind of knew that. Like I've said before, I don't believe in having to write like every day of your life or anything, but I do think that in cases where it's not working, sometimes just like committing to it is what you gotta do, and you will get through the block. And that showed itself so clearly this month. So I couldn't be more happy with what I did this month in terms of the project. I would just love to hear how your NaNoWriMo went, what you accomplished, because I'm really trying to divorce NaNoWriMo from the word count, and I feel like I've really completely done that at this point, other than the word count, or the word count if that's important to you. How your NaNoWriMo went. Please let me know. I love hearing from you guys. That's all for this one, folks. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video. Bye!